Sarah Mitchell's morning began like a domino effect of small disasters. Her alarm didn't go off at 6 a.m. as planned, and she woke up to her 12-year-old son Tommy shaking her shoulder at 6:45 a.m. "Mom, the school just called. There's a water pipe burst and they're closing for the day," Tommy said, still in his pajamas. Sarah shot up in bed, her heart racing. As a single mother and the district's lead prosecutor, she was no stranger to juggling emergencies. But today was different. She had 3 major cases to present in court, and Judge Harrison, the new stickler judge everyone was talking about, was presiding. The digital clock on her bedside table seemed to mock her as she scrambled through her morning routine. Her usual polished appearance took a hit as she hastily pulled on a navy blue pantsuit that desperately needed ironing. Her well-styled hair had to settle for a quick brush and some hairspray. "Mrs. Johnson can't take Tommy today," Sarah's mother said over the phone. "She's got the flu." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her mother, who usually stepped in to help with Tommy, was in Atlanta visiting Sarah's sister, who had just had a baby. The babysitter was sick, and now the school was closed. "Tommy!" Sarah called out while slipping on her shoes. "Get dressed, buddy. You're coming to the courthouse with me." Tommy's face lit up. At 12, he found the courthouse exciting, even though he knew his mom would make him sit quietly in her office with books and his tablet. The morning traffic was worse than usual. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, making the roads slick and slow. Sarah's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as she glanced at the dashboard clock creeping toward 8:30 a.m. "Mom, you forgot to eat breakfast," Tommy pointed out, munching on a granola bar from his emergency snack stash in the car. "I'll grab something later," Sarah replied, though they both knew she probably wouldn't. After 15 years as a district attorney, missing meals had become a part of her routine. The courthouse parking lot presented another challenge. Her reserved spot was blocked off with orange cones and a maintenance work sign. Rain had flooded part of the lot, and workers were busy fixing a drainage issue. Precious minutes ticked by as Sarah circled the lot before finding a spot far from the courthouse entrance. She grabbed her umbrella, but the wind turned it inside out immediately. "Great," she muttered, clutching her briefcase stuffed with case files. "Tommy, stay close to me," she said as they dashed through the rain. Sarah tried to shield both Tommy and her documents, but by the time they reached the courthouse steps, her makeup was running slightly and her suit was speckled with rain. The security guard, Joe, who had known Sarah for years, raised an eyebrow at her unusual appearance but quickly helped them through the security check. "Rough morning, Miss Mitchell?" he asked kindly. "You have no idea, Joe," Sarah replied, attempting to fix her hair in the scanner's reflection. "Can you keep an eye on Tommy in my office? I've got to get to courtroom 3. "Of course, ma'am. Tommy and I will have a great time," Joe said with a wink at Tommy. Sarah kissed Tommy's forehead and handed him his backpack. "Be good, okay? I'll check on you between cases." Glancing at her watch, Sarah saw it was already 8:35 a.m. She was late. Something that hadn't happened in years. Her heart pounded as she hurried toward courtroom 3, her wet shoes squeaking on the marble floor. Before entering, she smoothed her damp hair and straightened her jacket. Sarah Mitchell had built her reputation on professionalism and excellence. She was known for her sharp mind and attention to detail, not for being late or disheveled. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 3, unaware that her day was about to become even more challenging. "Some of our biggest cases. How could he not know who she was?" asked Linda, a senior court clerk. "It's not just about not knowing her," responded Mark, a public defender. "It's about making assumptions without even properly looking at who was standing in front of him." In his chambers, Judge Harrison sat at his desk, his lunch untouched. He had already received 3 calls from the Chief Judge's office. His computer screen showed several email notifications, including one from the State Bar Association, requesting a statement about the morning's events. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped buzzing either. Texts from fellow attorneys, calls from journalist friends, and emails from various legal organizations poured in. But her focus remained on her cases. She had 2 more to present after lunch, and she was determined to handle them with the same excellence she'd always shown. During the lunch break, Sarah visited Tommy in her office. "Mom, are you in trouble?" he asked, noticing her tired expression. Sarah hugged her son tightly. "No, honey. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and then they have to learn from them. That's all that happened today." As the afternoon session approached, more people filtered into the courtroom than usual. Word had spread, and now several senior attorneys from nearby firms had come to observe. Even a few law students from the local university had shown up, having heard about the incident through their professors. Sarah straightened her now damp suit and organized her files for the afternoon cases. She could feel all eyes on her but remained focused on her work. The morning's incident had become more than just a personal slight. It had turned into a moment that forced many in the legal community to confront their own biases. Judge Harrison returned to his bench, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. The afternoon session was about to begin, but the real story was still unfolding. Sometimes the most important cases weren't the ones on the docket, but the ones that forced people to examine their own prejudices and assumptions. The afternoon session was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Chief Judge Barbara Wilson, a respected figure with 30 years of experience, quietly entered the courtroom and sat in the back row. Her presence sent ripples of whispers through the already tense atmosphere. At the prosecutor's table, Sarah Mitchell continued presenting her case, unaware of the Chief Judge's arrival. She was in the middle of questioning a witness when Judge Harrison's hands began to shake slightly. He had noticed his superior watching the proceedings. "And where were you on the night of—" Sarah began but was cut off by Judge Harrison. "Miss Mitchell," he interrupted, his voice softer than the morning's harsh tone. "Would you please approach the bench?" The courtroom fell silent as Sarah walked forward. The defense attorney joined them, as was procedure, but Judge Harrison shook his head. "No need, counselor. Court will be in recess for 15 minutes. As the gallery watched, Judge Harrison stood up, stepped down from his elevated position, and did something unprecedented. He walked around to the front of the bench, facing not just Sarah but the entire courtroom. "Before we continue," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I owe Miss Mitchell and this court an apology." He removed his glasses, revealing eyes that were tired and filled with regret. "This morning I made assumptions based on appearance alone. I failed to see the accomplished district attorney standing before me." Sarah stood perfectly still, her case files in hand. Behind her, Chief Judge Wilson leaned forward, listening intently. "Miss Mitchell has served this district for 15 years, Judge Harrison continued. "She has won countless cases, mentored dozens of young attorneys, and earned the respect of everyone in this legal community. And yet, this morning, I saw only what my biases wanted me to see." The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, recording every word. Several people had their phones out, but no one tried to stop them. This was a moment that needed to be documented. "Your Honor," Sarah finally spoke, her voice clear and steady. "May I address the court?" Judge Harrison nodded, looking directly at her for the first time that day. "I've been a prosecutor for 15 years, Sarah began. "I've won difficult cases, lost some that still keep me awake at night, and tried every day to ensure justice is served fairly. But I've also been mistaken for a defendant, a court clerk, and even a janitor more times than I can count." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Today wasn't just about a judge not recognizing a district attorney. It was about the assumptions we all carry, the quick judgments we make, and the people who suffer because of them. In the back of the courtroom, Chief Judge Wilson nodded slightly. Tommy, who had sneaked in with Officer Joe to watch his mother, sat wide-eyed, seeing his mom stand up for herself and others. "The law," Sarah continued, "is supposed to be blind to everything except facts and justice. But we, as humans, often fail to live up to that standard. Today could be just another story about bias in the justice system, or it could be a moment of change." Judge Harrison listened, his face showing a mix of shame and understanding. The $200 fine form still sat on his bench, a symbol of his rushed judgment. "I accept your apology, Judge Harrison," Sarah said finally. "But I hope this moment teaches all of us something about looking beyond our first impressions." Chief Judge Wilson stood up, making her presence known. "I believe," she announced, walking forward, "that we've all witnessed something important today. Judge Harrison, I'd like to see you in my chambers after court. Miss Mitchell, please join us." The recess was called, and as people filed out of the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. The tension from earlier had transformed into something different, a shared understanding that they had witnessed not just an apology, but a moment of real change. Tommy ran to his mother, hugging her tightly. "Mom, you were amazing," he whispered. Sarah hugged him back, aware that her son had just learned an important lesson about standing up for oneself with dignity and professionalism. How a difficult morning had turned into a pivotal moment in her career. The incident would be discussed in law schools, written about in legal journals, and used as a case study in judicial training programs. But for Sarah, the most important outcome was the possibility of real change. The hope that someday no other attorney would be judged by their appearance rather than their abilities. 1 week after the courthouse incident, Sarah Mitchell found herself back in Judge Harrison's courtroom. This time, though, things were very different. The judge had arranged for a special session, not for normal court cases, but for an open discussion about bias in the justice system. The wooden benches were filled with judges, lawyers, court staff, and even law students from the local university. Tommy sat in the front row wearing a small suit he'd insisted on wearing to support his mom. Next to him, Mrs. Peterson patted his shoulder proudly. As Sarah walked to the center of the courtroom where she had once been wrongly fined, she began, "Last week, something happened in this room that many people experience every day. The only difference was that this time everyone was watching." Judge Harrison sat, not on his elevated bench, but in a chair at ground level. He had removed his black robe, choosing instead to wear a regular suit. This wasn't about authority today, it was about learning and understanding. "I've been practicing law for 15 years, Sarah continued, looking around the packed courtroom. "I've won cases, lost cases, and earned the respect of my colleagues. But I've also been stopped by security, asked to show my bar card when others weren't, and mistaken for everyone except an attorney." In the audience, several black attorneys nodded in recognition, their own stories mirrored in Sarah's. Judge Harrison stood up next, his voice humbler than the commanding tone of a week ago. "I thought I was a fair judge," he admitted. "I prided myself on following the law exactly, but I failed to see my own bias, my own quick judgments based on nothing but appearances." The room was silent as he continued. "Miss Mitchell could have demanded my resignation. Instead, she suggested education. She chose to turn my mistake into a learning opportunity for everyone." Sarah watched as Judge Harrison shared his journey over the past week. He had spent hours reading about implicit bias, attending workshops, and meeting with minority legal organizations. His honesty about his failures and determination to change moved many in the room. "Yesterday," he said, "I visited a high school in our city's predominantly black neighborhood. I spoke to students about careers in law. One young girl raised her hand and asked if she could become a judge. A week ago, I might have given a generic answer. But now I shared Miss Mitchell's story, and I saw hope in that girl's eyes." Tommy beamed with pride as his mother stepped forward again. Together, Sarah and Judge Harrison unveiled their new initiative, a comprehensive training program for all courthouse staff, from judges to security guards, addressing unconscious bias and promoting inclusivity. "Real change," Sarah explained, "doesn't come from punishment or shame. It comes from understanding, education, and the willingness to be uncomfortable while we learn and grow." The chief judge announced that their courthouse would be the first in the state to implement mandatory bias training for all employees. Other courthouses were already calling to learn more about their program. During the break, Tommy ran up to his mother. "Mom, can I tell them about the time you won that big case? The one with the bad guys who stole all that money?" Sarah smiled, remembering the complex financial fraud case she had won last year. "Maybe another time, honey. Today is about something even more important than winning cases." Judge Harrison approached, carrying a document. "Miss Mitchell," he said, handing it to her. It was the $200 fine notice from the previous week, now framed with a new inscription, a reminder that justice must see clearly. The document would hang in the courthouse lobby alongside a new policy statement about equality and respect. As the session continued, lawyers shared their experiences and solutions were discussed. Courthouse staff, from the newest clerk to the most senior judge, listened and learned. This wasn't just another mandatory training, it was a real conversation about making the justice system truly just. By the end of the day, several other courthouses had requested copies of their training program. What had started as one judge's mistake was becoming a movement for change in the legal community.